Joe joined the Catholic Extension Society in 2008. Prior to that, he was a caseworker at Catholic Charities at Chicago, where he served thousands of immigrant families, so he has a lot of experience there. He has worked in a variety of parish and ministry settings in Chicago and abroad, and among some of the most under-resourced and marginalized populations. He studied for 3 years at the University of St. Mary of the Lake in Mundelein Seminary. He was a seminarian for the Archdiocese of Chicago. Joe has a Bachelor of Arts from Loyola University, a Master of Arts in Theology from Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, and a Master of Science in Public Service Management from DePaul University in Chicago. So it is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the Diocese of Marquette and to you this afternoon, Mr. Joe Boland. Joe?
Well, good afternoon. Is it afternoon yet? I think so. Great. I am very pleased to be here with all of you today. I'm very honored by the invitation to be with you. I'm joined with some others who have made the trek north with me today, and that's Ms. Kathy Handelman over here, who writes the Catholic for the Catholic Extension magazine, and Mark is our photographer back here, who's traveled with us and is helping us capture all the wonderful stories that are present here in your diocese. Father mentioned a little bit about Catholic Extension. Our president is a priest of the Archdiocese of Chicago. His name is Father Jack Wall, and he has this theory that everyone in the church should know about the work of Catholic Extension. Whether they support it or not doesn't matter. Just knowing about it and being aware of its history and then also its possibility is something that every Catholic should be in touch with. So I'm pleased today to be able to come, and I was asked to come just to provide some information and background about this great organization, which has a tremendous legacy in the history of the Church of the United States, and to talk about how it continues to have impact for Catholics today and will have impact well into the future. So I appreciate your time today. Just a couple of quick notes about Catholic Extension. It's a national fundraising organization, and that's what it's always been. It supports under-resourced Catholic communities, and the focus of its work is to support Catholic communities specifically here in the United States. And part of our theory is that the work of Catholic Extension does not have to be exclusive. There are, of course, societies that we reference that support the work of the Church in other countries, in Latin America and in Asia and Africa, where the Church is growing. And those are extremely important ministries, extremely important societies. There are ways that we can be supportive of our own diocese, of our own parish. And our argument to the Church is that's extremely important. You should be focused on your own parish. You should be focused on your own diocese. But in a very special way, and this is the piece of the puzzle that Catholic Extension represents in the U.S. Church, in a very special way, we have a duty, an obligation, a responsibility to our fellow Catholics around the United States to ensure that the faith community and the Catholic faith is bright and stable and thriving in our own land and among our own people. And that is the work of Catholic Extension. And what is it that we do, and how do we go about doing our work? I think it first starts with listening. It is extremely important for us to be in touch with the dioceses that receive support from Catholic Extension. This is one of the dioceses, one of the 86 that currently receives support from Catholic Extension. And it is critically important that we're out there in touch with the needs, not only the needs, but the opportunities that we witness in the Catholic Church today. And so there's a question just at my table about how often I travel. I think I've been to about 40 different dioceses this year so far. So it's really important for Catholic Extension, not only myself, but our staff to get out there. And after we've listened to those needs, to raise awareness among Catholics throughout the country about some places that are little known to the public and very seldomly exposed to a broader audience, and to talk to them about the great things and the vibrancy that we are witnessing in the church, and most importantly, the great possibility that we see. And we raise that awareness with the intention of raising funds ultimately. As a fundraising organization, that is our goal. And those funds don't come from any national collections, any second collections where we pass around the basket. They come from generous donors who have been, whose hearts have been touched by what they have witnessed in Catholic Extension's magazine, in its writings, and want to support the church, want to ensure that the Catholic faith continues to grow in this country. And currently that base of donors is somewhere around 100,000 Catholics or so. And once we've been able to raise those funds, Catholic Extension's job, and this is the piece of the organization that I have, is to strategically invest in the church, to ensure that we're supporting and identifying and incubating where the church is its most innovative, where it is its most creative, and where it has the greatest opportunity to thrive into the future. And as you'll see in a moment, there are many opportunities in the church for us to thrive into the future. The scope of our work, and I'll go through this very quickly, it includes a lot of different things. When Catholic Extension originally was founded, the scope of work really focused on bricks and mortar, building churches. And it has expanded in recent years to include many other forms of support. So basic operations. There are Native American reservations, I know, in various parts of the country whose average weekly collection is about $20, and they can't afford to staff a priest. Yet, in some of the poorest communities is where you want the church to be the most. And so one of the things that Catholic Extension does is just support the basic operations, paying of the salaries of women religious, of lay people, of priests who are doing the work of the church. Another important aspect of the work of Catholic Extension is to support future leadership. Seminarians, 550 seminarians are currently supported by Catholic Extension. Lay leaders, deacons, there are many ways in which we're able to support the future leadership of the Catholic Church. I mentioned the bricks and mortar. Another key area for us is supporting youth ministry, campus ministry, all the great ministries of the church that reach out to young people that are really going to be the source of the future leaders and the future servants in the church going forward. We also help dioceses build capacity, supporting initiatives that will help them save their resources as well as raise new resources for themselves, and many other pastoral ministries in the church. So the scope of the work of Catholic Extension is extremely broad, and we're able to help in so many different ways to meet the needs and the opportunities of different dioceses around the country. As was mentioned earlier, Catholic Extension was founded by a Michigan priest. So we have that, our roots grounded in Michigan. A Midwestern priest who at the time he was envisioning Catholic Extension, it was 1905, and the Catholic Church was pretty well established in places like Chicago and places like New York and Boston, but really once you got outside of those major urban metropolitan areas, what he found in his travels was that the church was hanging on by a thread in many places, and his vision was that we needed to really strengthen these Catholic communities, and that among Catholic communities that were very stable, we needed to raise resources and direct those resources to communities across the nation. And the first church that ever received support from Catholic Extension was a small mission church in Ellsworth, Kansas, where he granted $1,000 to help build their first church, and that church continues to be there today in Ellsworth, Kansas. As you can see from the stat up here, Catholic Extension, since Father Francis Clement Kelly began his work, has helped build 12,000 churches and church facilities throughout the United States. So there are some dioceses we go to where 100% of the churches have been built with funding from Catholic Extension. 100% of their churches, their parish halls, their rectories, and so it's a great legacy that the organization has had over these past 100 years. It was established as a papal society which if you asked me to define what that meant canonically, I don't think I could give you an answer. But I think at the time, what they were seeking to do was to ensure that this organization wouldn't be dominated by any one diocese or any one bishop. So what they wanted to do was ensure that it was ultimately responsible to Rome, and this continues to be the case. The president is always appointed by the Holy See. So it would give Catholic Extension the freedom to really be a resource to the entire Catholic Church throughout the country, wherever the need was greatest, and not have to worry about regional or local politics. And so while the Chancellor of Catholic Extension is always ex officio the Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago, outside of that, it really is kind of this freestanding national Catholic organization whose only job it is not to impose its own agenda, but to understand the needs and the opportunities in the church and to be able to be flexible enough to respond to those needs. One of the ways that we've been able to get the word out over the years that I mentioned is this Catholic Extension magazine. This magazine is almost as old as the organization itself. And while print magazines are probably not the most cutting-edge form of communication these days, this continues to reach a very broad audience and continues to be a primary way that we communicate with donors the wonderful stories of faith that we encounter in the dioceses that we support. We're also present on social media as well, so don't worry about that. We're also breaking ourselves into the digital age. But it reminded me today, I was with Bishop Sample, and he was talking about how Bishop Barriga would write these letters to the societies that were supporting him over in Europe. And that became a way that they got in touch with these great sort of legendary stories of mission work, of struggles, yet the faith communities prevailing even in the midst of great struggles and in the midst of great challenges. And I think in a certain sense, our magazine attempts to do that for our own donors, to say, this is where the faith community really is alive today in our church. And so I brought copies of this magazine for all of you today, and we'll distribute that in a little bit. Another way that you might be aware that Catholic Extension gets a message out is these calendars. If you have a religious calendar in your house, there's one of two options. It's either from Catholic Extension or it's not. There's only a couple of companies that are in this, but we get about 4 million of these things out every year, and it's a source of funding for us to underwrite our grants. But it's also a way for us to tell the stories of what's going on in faith communities around the country. So there'll be a parish or a community that's featured every month. And that has been another way that we've gotten the word out about Catholic Extension. As I mentioned to you before, we are working with about 86 dioceses across the country. And if you can see this, the 86 dioceses we support are the yellow areas, the shaded areas, and it covers 3/4 of the landmass of the United States that we're currently working with. All of Alaska, Puerto Rico is included in that, and then some of the U.S. Territories in the Pacific and the U.S. protectorates. But there's really a broad base of dioceses in all regions of the country that we are working with. And we think in the process of getting out to these dioceses and visiting them and sitting down not only with bishops but with people in parishes, Catholics in the pews, this gives Catholic Extension a unique vantage point. Again, not to be the inventors of our own agenda that we seek to impose on the church, but to really listen to the needs and the trends and understand the phenomena that we're witnessing in the church so that we can respond to those needs in a very strategic and a very thoughtful way. And I think some of the things that we're witnessing in these dioceses is something important for the entire church to be aware of, and what I want to talk to you today about. So what is it that we are witnessing? It's good news. We walk into places and we don't find a depressing, run-down place. We find people who, even in the midst of great struggle, even in the midst of great challenge, are persevering and moving forward in their faith in very heroic ways. We find hope in the poorest areas of the country, we find vibrant, growing church communities wherever we go in the country. We also encounter many challenges, and those of you who have done any work in the church are well aware of the challenges, both socially, culturally, that we are up against today. But even in the midst of those challenges, what are we finding? A transforming faith, a transforming Catholic faith that is enabling people to rise above circumstances that they find themselves in. And one of the things that has really captured our imagination as of late is some of the things that Cardinal Dolan has been talking about when people ask him about this whole idea of the new evangelization. Some of you have probably heard that term thrown around, and it's something that we're going to continue to hear as we move on into this next year in the church. But Cardinal Dolan has been talking about this happiness attracts theory. And I'll read you this quote if you can't see it. He said this on a radio show right before he became cardinal. He says, "What weighs on me the most is the caricature of the Catholic Church as crabby, naysaying, down in the dumps, discouraging, and on the run. And I'm thinking, if there's anything that should be upbeat, affirming, positive, joyful, it should be people of faith." And I think, and we think at Catholic Extension, that Cardinal Dolan's right on. We've got a lot of good news in the church. And because of where we are in the history, in our history today, we've had our narrative hijacked a little bit from us. That every time you pick up a paper, secular paper especially, are you going to read good news about the Catholic Church? Probably not. You're going to probably read a story that has a negative bent to it. I don't know how many times I've read an article in the paper, and it throws this expression in there. The Catholic Church, comma, which is reeling from XYZ crisis, comma, and then it goes on with the rest of the statement. When I look at that, and when I consider all the people that we've visited around the country, and all the communities, and all the people serving the poor, and living this transforming faith, I think to myself, boy, I don't think we're reeling. I think the Catholics that are dedicated to this faith, that are living this faith, it is the true story that we should be exposing. Cardinal Dolan, when he went on to address the cardinals after being made a cardinal, he addressed all of his brother cardinals, and had this to say in his presentation. He said, "Joy is the infallible sign of God's presence." And I love that line. And again, I think he's right. I think we as Catholics have a duty to be focused on what we do well, and to not be, as Cardinal Dolan is saying, down in the dumps and crabby and naysaying, but to really understand where is the strong foundation, where are the assets that we can build upon as a people of faith, and to not let outsiders hijack our narrative and tell us that somehow the church is going down, down, down. As we say it, as we see it from our perspective in Catholic Extension, the church is continually and still on the rise. So how do we see ourselves in the church? If there's one thing that we can be doing through the various media through which we communicate, I like to think of Catholic Extension as MythBusters. I don't know if you've ever seen that show. I think it's on the Discovery Channel. I don't know if it's still on. But there's this show where they run these experiments. They hear about these crazy myths, can a scuba tank blow up a boat? And then they come up with this experiment to see whether it's true. I think Catholic Extension, in a certain sense, is trying to take on some of those myths in a very subtle way and communicate the good news that we have in the church. So what are some of these common myths? I just want to walk through some of these myths that we hear and showcase to you some of the great things that Catholic Extension has been seeing all across the country. And what's myth number one? There's no vocations. No, there could not be anyone who's interested in the priesthood or the religious life anymore. And I don't mean to make light of the fact that there has been a decline in vocations overall in the country, and that there continues to be need, and that we continue to need to promote vocations among young people. But this idea that, it's kind of a dead thing and we shouldn't pursue this anymore is kind of a hoax. I remember once a couple years ago I went to a presentation and it was actually a Catholic priest, and he said, quote, "I think the priesthood's dead as we know it." And I thought, I don't know if I can accept that. And why can't I accept that? Well, I come to places like Marquette. And this was a story in our recent magazine. And I met your football priest here, and Father Nick, and Father Ryan, both of whom were ordained last year. And it might seem like a small number of guys, 2 guys, but we've been doing some research on this at Catholic Extension. The culture of vocation is very strong in dioceses like this, like Marquette. Much stronger, in fact, than it is in archdioceses like mine in Chicago. And how do we know that? Well, if you look at vocations per capita, or as I like to say, vocations per Catholica, if you look at that ratio, you probably have 1 vocation for every 5,000 or 7,000 Catholics or so. Do you know that ratio in the Archdiocese of LA, the largest archdiocese in the country, is one seminarian for every 100,000 Catholics? So I think there is something to this, that there is a spirit of vocation here. Kathy and Mark and I, last night, were driving from Duluth. I thought it was like 2 hours away. It was like 4.5 hours. We saw a moose, a deer, and a bear all on the way, and we made it. Sounds like a made-up story, but it's true. We were driving here from Duluth, but we had the opportunity to meet some folks in that diocese, and they're about to ordain 5 men this coming year, and they are also preparing to send 10 young women into religious life this year, and that's tremendous. Even in a large diocese, you wouldn't find that. So there is something to this culture of vocations, even though we have miles to go before we sleep and many more vocations to encourage. Take hope that there are young people in larger numbers responding to the call to priesthood, to religious life, to service in the church. I also met a young woman in Boise, Idaho recently. Campus ministry is a great source of vocations. In fact, I was just meeting one of the seminarians from your diocese, and his vocation was born out of his experience of campus ministry here in this diocese. And I met a young woman just recently at Boise. It's almost commonplace now for me to walk into a campus ministry and to hear young people say, "Oh, I'm considering priesthood, I'm considering religious life." And this young woman was telling me just a month ago, "Oh yeah, I graduated college, I discerned for a year, and now I'm ready to go into religious life." And I just don't know that everybody is aware that these vocations are out there and these things are happening in the church, and we need to take hope in these stories. Myth number 2, and we hear this myth a lot. There are no young people in the church. They're not connecting with the faith anymore. And boy, wherever I go in the country, I am finding the exact opposite to be true. Now, do we always have a challenge with the younger generation to help communicate the faith? Sure. But I find young people in droves and dedicated young people that are willing to work and serve in the church. And I think of places like Stillwater, Oklahoma. And you see this young man in that picture? He's got a John Deere shirt on. He was so excited to go to Oklahoma State University, where Catholic Extension is providing support for their campus ministry. He said that in high school he was the only Catholic kid in his entire high school. And he came from a rural community in Oklahoma, and he was so happy to finally come to a place where there were other young Catholics. He was able to maintain his faith throughout that entire experience of high school, and then in college have an experience where that faith could really grow. And again, he is not the exception to the rule. He is more the norm that we're finding more and more as we get out there. I think of these young people that I met in Kirksville, Missouri last year, Truman State. Half of the Catholic kids on the whole campus go to Mass on Sunday. I don't know what the average Mass attendance is nationally for Catholics going to church. I know in Chicago it's 25%. They figure that 20 to 25% of Catholics actually go to Mass on Sunday. Well, I showed up to a university. In theory, some people think this is the time where young people step away from the faith. 50% of the Catholics on campus were going to Mass every Sunday. They touch the lives in a small state university of 1,500 Catholic students every year. People going on to priesthood, people going on to religious life, people pursuing careers and degrees that would enable them to go out into the world and serve as good Catholics. That's encouraging stuff. And again, this is not the exception. We're really finding this to be normative. Again, in Helena, Montana, gathered with rural kids all over the country, youth who come together every summer to experience their faith, to sing together, to pray together. And it's an encouraging thing to find youth in so many numbers. Myth number 3. There's 4 myths, by the way, just so we know where we're going with this. Myth number 3, shrinking population. You hear a lot of people talk about, oh, the church is shrinking, we're closing churches, and that is true. The church has shrunk in places like the Northeast, in New York and Boston. Catholic population has shrunk. It has grown by leaps and bounds in other communities. And so I think of places like Sunnyside, Washington, the middle of the state, a rural community. I walked into this church, there are 5,000 families that has just grown in the past decade. The Catholic Church is exploding. These are people who work the fields. It's a very poor, very humble community. There are 5,000 people filling this small mission church. And the priest came up to me and he begged me, he said, please, you have to help us get a new church. We can't afford it on our own. It's a poor community. We're going to need some outside help. But we went from 0 to 5,000 in just a decade. And this is an image of that church, and you can see how many young people there are at this parish celebration. I also went to a place in Boise, the Diocese of Boise, Jerome, Idaho. Small town. They had maybe 100, 200 people coming to Mass on a Sunday. And over the course of the decade, they had to build a church that would seat 1,500 people for Mass. And they had to build these facilities. And now that church that you see, that large church, is too small for them. So they built big thinking, oh, we'd have room to grow in the future. And now the church itself is even too small to accommodate the growth of their community. People are driving 75 miles to go to church because they have no other church around them. This is a growing population. And this is especially true. Wherever we go, we are finding Catholic churches that are growing, that are exploding is really the right word. And then it's an exciting thing, and it's a wonderful problem to have. And then finally, myth number 4. And this one's especially near and dear to me. You hear people say that I think the church is out of touch. They're out of touch with people's lives, with where they are, in their life. And I have never found anything further from the truth, that the church is very much relevant and in the muck of people's humanity in a very special way. I was last month out in the Coachella Valley. This was our Lumen Christi Award winner last year. Her name is Sister Gabby Williams. And this woman who she is talking with is a field worker, and she knows this woman is sick, actually, and this woman knows that if she can't work, her family will starve. And so even though she's sick from the pesticides in the fields where she picks fruit, she has to go out there every day and make ends meet for her family. And this sister is so close to her. And I asked this woman, I said, what does your faith mean to you, given your circumstances in life? And she said to me, boy, I wouldn't make it if it wasn't for my faith. If the church wasn't present to me, if Sister Gabby wasn't present to me, there's no way I'm making it through this life. And I just think that speaks to a church that's very much in touch with people's humanity, social troubles, issues of social justice. And I see that wherever I go. In fact, there have been so many communities that I've visited where if the church has ever thought about pulling back, about closing a church or reducing their ministry, that it's often not even the Catholics who are the most upset about that it's the non-Catholics, because they see objectively the incredible impact that the church has on people's lives. And imagine this one woman religious, Sister Gabby, in her 8 years of ministry there has served 130,000 people. And she said, I counted. I know how many people I've served. One person touching 130,000 lives. And then finally we see that here, bring it home to Marquette. I had the great opportunity last August to be in Gwinn, Michigan, in the K.I. Sawyer area, where you as a diocese decided, this area is not heavily Catholic, but it's poor, and we as a church need to be present to the poor. We need to be there for people. And it was powerful to see the resolve of the Catholics who have been a part of this incredible movement of Our Lady Help of Christians that is really trying to transform a community in a very powerful way. And so, Deacon Jack, I'm so glad you are here, and I hope you know how deeply we were touched by this. We were so touched by it, this ended up in our annual report, so that's coming soon. So the church is in touch with people's lives. What does this mean for all of us? And what do we think Catholic Extension's role is in the church? Well, first of all, I think this is about taking back our narrative as a Catholic people. That we need to acknowledge that wherever we go, there is great hope, and there is great promise, and there is incredible faith, and there is incredible foundation, and there are assets upon which we can build our faith community. And that we have to, at all costs, avoid the temptation that Cardinal Dolan talks about, to be discouraged and down in the dumps. Because when you get down to the core of it all, when you get down in the trenches, you see how brilliant the church really is in people's lives. And I think Catholic Extension's role, after taking back our narrative, is to really identify where the church has needs, but most importantly, where it has potential, and where it has possibility, and where we can be growing the church, so that finally we can be investing in the church, so that we can be finding those areas where there's potential for growth, and ensure that our faith community, our Catholic community, has a bright future for many years to come. So it's a special privilege that we have to be in touch with so many people in the church, to see the church at its brightest and the church at its best, and then to be in a position to tell those needs to a Catholic community across the United States, and then finally to be in a position to help those communities along the way. It's our privilege, and as Father Jack Wall said, we just want everybody to know about it, to know about this great movement in the church, that we're Catholics helping Catholics, and that really and truly, if we believe in that, and if we cultivate that spirit of solidarity among one another and don't get pigeonholed into our parochial or diocesan boundaries, we can really help the faith flourish for years to come in the United States. So thank you very much for your time. I'm going to offer you some magazines, and the only call to action I have for you is you can write into Catholic Extension online and get in touch with our website. I would just encourage you as a call to action, please get to know the work of Catholic Extension. I think it's important, not because I work there, I think it's important because I'm a Catholic, and I have come into an appreciation of its impact, and I hope that you will as well. So I'm going to ask Kathy to maybe help me pass these things out, and again, appreciate your time and your attention this afternoon. Thank you.